That opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. We come now to Government Order of the Day number 3.
Search and Surveillance Bill, Committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the Search and Surveillance Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Speaker. Members, the House in Committee for further consideration of the Search and Surveillance Bill. Members, when we last considered the bill, we were debating Part 3. The Honourable David Parker had the call and has 4 minutes and 43 seconds remaining if he so wishes.
Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr. Chairman, Part 3 of this bill is an important part of the bill. It deals with the powers and the orders that enforcement officers are going to use. It looks at warrants for surveillance devices, and in particular it looks at the use of production orders. Mr. Chairman, I want to say first of all that Labor supported the introduction of this bill. In fact, it was introduced by Labor, and when Labor looked at this bill, it didn't take the steps that were included in our bill lightly. It was based on 6 years of work by the Law Commission, and it was based on a widespread view that comprehensive reform was necessary of a series of laws that had been subject to ad hoc changes, and that led to real confusion, a lack of coherence, and some of these laws were 50 years old and simply didn't cover the technological changes that had occurred. So the first principle that Labor followed was that we recognised that in fighting crime, then we have to give our enforcement officers the adequate tools and powers, particularly reflecting changes that have occurred technologically. But there was a second principle that the National Party, when it took over the bill, didn't seem as concerned about, and that principle was that you equally must recognise that when you give coercive powers to enforcement agencies, you make sure you don't unreasonably undermine basic civil rights and liberties. And the thing that worries me about the way National has gone about this bill is that they had 2.5 years to actually act on it and put in place Labor's reforms, and they did nothing. They sat on it, they did nothing. Then at the last moment, as a result of a court decision in Hamid, they decided in a panic-stricken way, we're going to introduce new powers and we're not going to worry at all about how these powers could be misused, Mr. Chairman. And the fact was that in the legislation that came in last year, they were going to rush legislation through this House without reference to a select committee, without the ability of any individual or organisation to make submissions on it and to improve or change that legislation. And fortunately, they didn't have the numbers to do so, Mr. Chairman. They didn't have the numbers to do so, so the changes were temporary. And when the Select Committee looked at these details, the Select Committee, and I'm talking about the whole of the Select Committee, National as well as opposition members, acknowledged that the bill that National had introduced went far too far. It had no balance and it needed to be and has been significantly redrafted. Not only has the changes been made in the Select Committee, but the Minister has come back to this House with 92 pages of a supplementary order paper. 92 pages. How badly wrong did the National Party get this legislation? And the truth is, Mr. Chairman, but for the work of the Select Committee and the insistence of Labor that it goes to the Select Committee, that original bill would be on the statute books today and it would be wrong, and National Party members on the Select Committee admitted that many of the powers went over the top, were disproportionate to the offending, went to too many agencies and went too far. So I do acknowledge that some changes have been made that makes this part of the bill more palatable. We reduce the surveillance period without warrant. I think that's an important safeguard. We limit the retention of surveillance data on people who are quite innocent of any offending. It is absolutely repugnant that you'd be keeping on tape video surveillance of people intruding on their privacy that were doing nothing wrong. It's really important that we protect the privacy of individuals innocent of any offending against the law and against other people. And it imposes more stringent reporting requirements. But, Mr Speaker, this still does not go far enough, which is why Labor is not supporting the part. There are amendments in the name of my colleagues, Charles Cheval and David Parker, which we'll be supporting. But in particular, we want to focus in this debate on the use of production orders. Production orders, Mr Chairman, are orders that require a person to produce information or documents. That is in effect, Mr Chairman,
The Honourable Fulgoff.
Mr Chairman, that is in effect overriding what we would regard as the right to silence, that no person is normally forced to produce documents that might or might not be incriminating against them. In fact, it's only the Serious Fraud Office that has the power to issue production orders prior to this legislation coming into effect. And when we looked at how those powers were being used, sir, by the Serious Fraud Office, we found, in fact the Law Commission commented on it, that there was a tendency, because we gave these powers to the Serious Fraud Office, that they overused them. They didn't use the conventional investigation techniques. Their first instinct was to use these extraordinary powers, regardless of whether or not they were appropriate in the circumstances. And this brings me, sir, to the point that I think is most important in this debate. And that point is this. In this country, Parliament acts to hold government accountable, but there is also the fourth estate, the media, that has the vital role of holding a government to account. And for the media to be effective in the use of its authority, sir, then people who give information to the media must be confident that the information they provided will be made and kept confidential. It's vital to protect that confidentiality and the freedom of the press. And that's why, Mr Speaker, we are concerned that the Serious Fraud Office used production orders against the National Business Review during its inquiry into South Canterbury Finance. They went into the newsroom, they seized the documents. And is it any wonder, Mr Chairman, that an international rating agency saw New Zealand's rating in terms of media freedom drop from 8th in the world to 13th? That, Mr Speaker, is a significant drop. We are talking about international agencies that regard New Zealand no longer as a country that will protect the freedom of the media. And by God, haven't they got information to back that up? During the election campaign, what did we see? The Prime Minister using complaint over the Teapot affair to get the police to go into newsrooms again. We saw the Prime Minister misusing his power in terms of going on a radio live program, even though he was advised by the Electoral Commission not to. We saw the appointment of the Prime Minister's electorate chairman, a direct political and politicised appointment, going on to New Zealand On Air and opposing documentaries that might show the government in a bad light. Now, it's against that backdrop, Mr Chairman, that these powers available to the Serious Fraud Office and the police have got to be met with concern. And Labor wanted the government to tighten the use of production and examination orders by the Serious Fraud Office at the same time as similar powers were being conferred on the police under this bill. Regrettably, Mr Chairman, the government was not prepared to show the flexibility and the common sense to agree to that. If they had agreed to that, then in all likelihood, this piece of legislation, which is controversial, which risks intruding on the privacy of individuals, could have gone through with the overwhelming support of this House. And that would have been a sign that we've got the balance right, the balance between giving enforcement agencies the powers they need and the balance between protecting the privacy of innocent individuals. Mr Chairman, we offered cooperation to get that consensus support. It's not too late now for the Minister and the Chair, although he might be reluctant to override the Minister in charge of the bill, to say, Minister, come to your senses on this legislation. We can get overwhelming support of the House for it, but let's protect the role of the Fourth Estate in making sure that the government is held to account and that people's privacy is being protected. That is what Labor is asking for. It's not unreasonable, Mr Chairman, and if the government finally makes the decision to make that compromise, to show that flexibility, to have that common sense, to respect the role of the media in our society, and to get the balance right between giving police and other enforcement agencies the powers they need, balancing that against the right of New Zealanders, ordinary New Zealanders, to privacy in their life, then we could get support to this bill. I urge the government to make that change.
Before I call, there's too much noise coming from the government benches. If you want to make discussions, go out in the lobbies. That's what the lobbies are for. It's difficult to concentrate and to hear what the members are saying. I call David